Hello, so welcome to another reading vlog. At the end of this reading vlog, I'm going to be going to the Wicked musical, which is based on The Wizard of Oz, or I think more specifically it's based on the book Wicked. So my plan is, before I go along to the musical, I'm going to read all the books from the original Wizard of Oz series. I think there's 14 books, maybe 15. I haven't properly put together the list. But I have an audiobook of the full collection. I think that's got 14 in it, but I think there's another one. I'll look that up properly. But I'm going to read that full collection. I have previously read the first 2 books in the series, but I've decided to reread them because it's been a long time. And actually I'm glad I did, because I just read the first book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, I think it's called. I just read that and I'd actually forgotten about some of the stuff that happens in the end. So if you somehow don't know the story of the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy gets caught up in a cyclone. They call it a cyclone in the book. But we just recently had a cyclone here in New Zealand, and like having researched cyclones as a result, thought cyclones were a southern hemisphere thing and like hurricanes are a northern hemisphere thing. So shouldn't it have been a hurricane? Or I think more specifically like a tornado? Anyway, whatever. Dorothy's house gets picked up and her and her little dog Toto find themselves in the magical land of Oz. And she then goes on a journey to the Wizard of Oz to ask for his help in getting back. Along the way, she meets the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, who also decide to ask the Wizard of Oz for things. My memory was basically that they go and kill the Wicked Witch of the West, and then they come back and get the things that they wanted from the Wizard of Oz. But there is in the story, I'm not sure if in the movie this is how it happens, but in the book they do then go on another bit of an adventure before they're able to get the things they want. And in that bit they do go through this land of China, which reminded me there is that other movie, I think it was called like The Great and Powerful Oz. So I might try and watch that movie as well as maybe the original. I do also have the DVD for Return to Oz, which is my most favorite Oz story. I really enjoyed it as a kid, but it is actually really dark. Basically in this one, Dorothy keeps talking about how she went to Oz and they think she's crazy, so they send her off to get like electroshock therapy, and then she finds herself back in Oz where like all these horrible things have been happening. My favorite part is there is a princess with like a room full of different heads that she can put on. I also really like TikTok, this like steam powered robot. So I'm probably going to watch this as well. But the main thing I want to do is read Wicked. Now I have read this before, but about 20 years ago, or maybe even more. When was this book released? Can't be that old. First published in 1995. I probably read it not that long after it was first published. And I'm a little bit afraid of going back to it because I really loved it at the time. I loved how it adapted the Wizard of Oz ideas into this new story where we're following the Wicked Witch of the West, but she is born with green skin and she's allergic to water, and there's kind of a lot of conflict between her and the Good Witch of the North, as well as like all this really cool steampunk stuff. And I really loved how it showed how Dorothy is really being manipulated to see things in a particular way. So I really love this at the time, but there's a lot of things that 20-year-old me liked that grown-up me does not like. So I'm a little bit afraid to go back to some of the books that I loved when I was 20 years old. But we're going to try this again. And I think if I read all the original Oz books first, then it'll be really interesting to see how Gregory Maguire has used the world in this book. Because the original Wizard of Oz books are really like children's books, whereas this is like a proper adult fantasy book. So we're going to read a bunch of Oz books and watch a bunch of Oz movies and then go and see the musical, which I'm super excited for. So I'll be checking in with you as I read the books and letting you know what I think about them. And then of course taking you along to the musical. So I feel like saying something cheesy like, let's follow the yellow brick road, but I'm not hyped enough to do that kind of thing. Anyway, I think this will be an exciting journey. Hello. So please excuse all the clothes and old sheets and stuff behind me. I'm fully in decluttering mode at the moment. Hopefully by the time this vlog goes out, or by the end of this vlog, I'll have finished with all my decluttering. Hopefully. Anyway, I did manage to finish listening to The Marvelous Land of Oz yesterday. I remember now that the first time I read these first two books, I took a break after the second one and never got back to it because it's just a lot, the second book. It's so many puns and just like logical jokes. It's very whimsical. I mean, this is a children's book. I'm sure it's really great for a child to like read it, and it's so absurd that it like teaches you to think about certain things, but just all the wordplay gets a bit tiresome, I think, if you listen to it in one go. It's probably a really great book to like read a chapter before bed every night when you're a kid, but we don't have Dorothy. We're mainly following this boy named Tip, who has been a prisoner of the witch called Mombi, and he makes this kind of a scarecrow but with like a pumpkin head, calls him Jack, and he ends up being brought to life, and then they go on a bit of an adventure with the Scarecrow and the Tin Man after this army of women try to take over Oz, or take over the Emerald City. And that's not my favorite because the reasoning the women have for wanting to take over is just because men have been in power for too long and now it's time for the women to have a go, not because they have any problem with the current leadership. But there are also some parts where like the men are complaining because they're so exhausted from cleaning and cooking and childbearing, and they're like, how did the woman ever manage to do this? So like there's some good bits about it, but also some weird bits about it. But also like that part of the story is such a small part of the story. It's mostly just all the puns and the wordplay. So I was tired by the end of that, but then I started the next one. I haven't gotten very far into it. This is Ozma of Oz, and this one starts out very similarly to the beginning of the movie Return to Oz, which, as I said, was one of my favorites. So I'm very excited that we'll get some more of that. We already got the Wheelers from that movie, and also like the chicken Billina got an explanation of why she's called Billina. Oh, and in this one we've got Dorothy again. So it started with Dorothy going on a ship with her uncle to go to Australia. Then events happen and she ends up being washed away and finding herself back in Oz. So I'll keep reading that. The one annoying thing is the audiobook I've got, like, it doesn't have clear breaks between the books. Like, the books tend to end in the middle of like an audiobook chapter, so I never know how long I've actually got to go until I finish a book. But I'll read some more. I'll let you know how we're going. But so far, number 2 was a bit of a struggle, but I'm excited about how number 3 is going. Hi, so I have finished another 3 of the Oz books now. Firstly, Ozma of Oz. I think this is my favourite of the whole series, primarily because it's pretty much the same plot as the Return to Oz movie, which of course I love. We've got all my favourite parts of this. We've got the Wheelers, we've got TikTok, we've got the evil queen lady with the multiple heads. We've got the whole thing where they're under the ground and people have been turned into ornaments and they have to try to pick which ones are the people. And it's maybe not quite as dark as the movie because there's not that whole like thing where Dorothy's put in a mental hospital and getting electroshock therapy like what happens in the movie. But it is still pretty dark in parts. So far Ozma of Oz is my favourite. Then the next one, wait, where's my list? Well, the next one was Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. So this one, I liked it. I feel like it felt very stretched out, kind of similarly to the second book. So in this one, Dorothy's gone to California and there's an earthquake and she ends up falling down with this other guy and a horse and a kitten, and they all fall down under the earth and they come across these vegetable people, and there's also this fruit that makes people turn invisible, and these invisible bears, also these wooden gargoyles, and then eventually they make it back to Oz. I will say, I've noticed in this one and also the next one, there's kind of this thing where Dorothy always has an out because somebody else has a magical artifact and they're always watching Dorothy, so they can always pull Dorothy out of any trouble. So it's kind of stupid when dangerous things are happening. It's like, oh, is Dorothy going to be okay? Like, yes, she's going to be okay, you know? But also, like, she often doesn't take that opportunity to keep herself safe, which is a little bit silly, but you know, these aren't serious books. These are just very silly children's books. So I think Frank Baum is very creative in the different characters that he's making in the different worlds. Like this vegetable people world under the earth was really cool, and I loved how they kept referring to us as meat people. But right at the end, there was like this big bit in Oz that kind of just felt like a completely different story and not really important. And then I've just finished listening to The Road to Oz. So in this one, honestly, Dorothy starts it out as like a complete bitch. She goes for a walk and gets lost, and then suddenly there's like an infinite number of roads for her to choose from, and she goes with this creepy shaggy man and this boy called Button Boy who's like kind of stupid, and Dorothy honestly keeps just calling everybody stupid, and I was like, wow, why is Dorothy being so mean? Seems really out of character compared to like how kind and nice she's made out to be in the first books. But maybe it's just because like calling people stupid wasn't considered mean. I don't know. Anyway, I guess I would also say in that one it just feels like they're wandering around through these different areas, kind of meeting different kinds of people. It seems just like Frank Baum's having fun creating different kinds of creatures in different places. But the actual story was a little bit pointless. But anyway, I am enjoying reading these. I do think there's some fun bits that I really would have loved as a child, and I kind of wish that I had read these books when I was a child. As well, I'm learning so much about all these different worlds that Frank Baum is creating, and I'm really interested to see which pieces of these are going to show up in Wicked, because there's so much that I never knew about the first time I read Wicked. And I don't know whether Gregory Maguire would have used any of that or not. I don't remember. Anyway, I've still got another 9 books to go. I need to hurry up because my audiobook is going to return itself next week. So I've got a deadline. So hopefully I'll check in with you again soon with some more thoughts about the Oz books. Hello. So I have actually read another 4 books from the Oz series since I last talked to you. It's many days later though, so I need to hurry up because I really am running out of time to read all these audiobooks before the collection returns itself to the library. But anyway, first off, I read The Emerald City of Oz. I actually don't remember exactly what this one was about. I think the Gnome King. Is it the one with the Gnome King? I've read so many now, I'm starting to go a little bit crazy. And I made notes, but my notes are never any good. Terrible. Past Penny, just not to be trusted. So in the Emerald City of Oz, I think the Gnome King is trying to attack. Oh, I think actually the Emerald City of Oz is the one where right at the beginning, Auntie Em and Uncle Henry are suddenly like in poverty. They can't afford to live, and so they're like, well, Dorothy, we don't really believe in this fairyland, but either you're going to have to go and become a servant somewhere because we can't afford to keep the farm, and we're going to have to go and become servants or something. So either you go and do that, or we don't really believe in this fairyland Oz that you've always been talking about, but maybe you could go there. And Dorothy goes and then makes an arrangement for Auntie Em and Uncle Henry to also be able to go to Oz. And I was just a little bit confused because do you know the only, like, if Auntie Em and Uncle Henry want to keep the farm, like, Dorothy is counted as a princess in Oz, and they have all these emeralds in the Emerald City, so like, couldn't you just like go and get some emeralds and then Auntie Em and Uncle Henry can keep working on the farm if that's what they want to do? Anyway, also in the Emerald City, the Gnome King is attacking Oz, and like it was an okay story. What I did note is the very end of the story basically says that now communication has been cut off from Oz, and so there won't be any more stories. But then the next story, The Patchwork Girl of Oz, starts with a prologue talking about how they managed to get back into communication because some fan of the Oz books in the human world made a suggestion. It sounds like basically he didn't want to write any more Oz books, but then everyone was like, where's the next Oz book? And I guess he wanted the money, so he decided to keep writing the books even though he'd written into the story that he wouldn't write anymore. So then he had to write in a reason why he was still writing them. But also, I really don't think he wanted to write any more Oz books because going forward, he often isn't including a lot of the original Oz characters. He's created a bunch of new characters, and some of them are really cool, Some of them I didn't like quite as much. Like the Shaggy Man is from some earlier books and he comes in a bit more, and I really don't like the Shaggy Man or Button Bright. I did quite like the Patchwork Girl. She is a girl made of like a patchwork blanket and then brought to life with the powder of life. And she goes on a bit of an adventure, and they do also in that one bring back Polychrome, who I think was in an earlier book, but I didn't mention her. Polychrome is like the daughter of a rainbow who sometimes gets lost on the land, and like she's all beautiful and rainbow and just like really whimsical. I really think, like I think I said it last time, Frank Baum's so great at creating these characters and these creatures and the worlds around it. A lot of it's not actually set in Oz specifically, but more fairy worlds around it. And he's really great at doing that. The plot's not always so great and very like meandery. Let's just go on a journey through all these different places and meet all these different people. Then the last two I've read is TikTok of Oz and The Scarecrow of Oz. And it's kind of weird, those titles, because they don't really describe what the books are about. So the TikTok of Oz is actually like introduces a whole bunch of new characters. And then we've got the Shaggy Man and Polychrome, and they're all kind of going on an adventure. What was their goal? Oh, I think they were trying to save the Shaggy Man's brother from the Gnome King. Like, it was okay, but again, just kind of wandering around. And TikTok is just like a tiny little mention in the bigger story. And then we had the Scarecrow of Oz, which is the same thing. This one, actually the main characters are Captain Bill and Trot, which I found out are characters from Frank Baum's other book series. So he's basically just taken those characters, had them have an adventure in Oz, called it an Oz book, and called it The Scarecrow of Oz because they get saved by the Scarecrow, like right at the very end. I feel like a lot of people would have been like, oh, The Scarecrow of Oz, I want that book, and then been like, why is the Scarecrow barely in the book? Anyway, I'm not having a bad time, but as well, I don't think these books are necessarily amazing, but it is fun to get the context and the bigger stories of Oz. I have 5 more books to read in 2.5 days. Maybe 3 days, because I actually have a separate audiobook for the very last book that lasts a little bit longer. So 3 days to read 5 more stories. Each one's about 5 hours long. I've got a lot of decluttering to do, and I can listen to my audiobook while I do that decluttering. So I think we can do it. I think we can do it. Hello. So I have finished the last 5 books of the Oz series. I'm very proud of myself for getting through the whole thing before the audiobooks return themselves to the library. But quick interlude. You know, I have been decluttering lately, and I found some old photos, and in amongst those I actually found these photos of my dad. These photos must be like from the early 80s-ish. These are photos of my dad. I'm pretty sure he's dressed up as the Tin Woodman. So that's kind of funny to come across just when I'm reading the Oz books. Anyway, let me tell you about the ones that I've read. So firstly, I read Rinky Tink in Oz. So this is a funny story because it's not really much about Oz. And even Rinky Tink is like a funny side character. It's really about this prince whose town gets invaded, and he's able to use these magic pearls that his family has to save everyone. So one of the pearls gives him wisdom, another one gives him strength, and another one makes him like indestructible. And then of course right at the end these characters go to Oz. I did like the way the magic pearls were used. It's quite a fun children's story, but again, like, it could have been not an Oz story very easily. Then I read The Lost Princess of Oz. So in this one Ozma goes missing, and I think in this one Frank Baum tried to include Oz a little bit more. It kind of splits between some other new characters that he's created, Cake the Cookie Cook and the Frogman. And they're trying to find her missing magical dishpan. At the same time, Ozma's magic mirror and also Glinda's magic book have gone missing, and like a lot of things have gone missing, and so different characters are trying to track down these things and Ozma herself. And of course, at the end they're successful because of course. Oh, the one funny thing in this one is that randomly, like, how many books into the series are we? 11th book in the series, and suddenly Toto starts talking. Like, most animals in Oz talk, so it was always weird that Toto didn't talk, and there was a little bit of talk earlier about how, like, he could talk, he just chose not to talk because he was happy with expressing himself with barking. But in this one he does talk, and then in future books he continues to talk sometimes. Very strange, very strange. Then I read The Tin Woodman of Oz, and I will say this one, unlike The Scarecrow of Oz and TikTok of Oz, actually had quite a lot of the Tin Man. So in this one, again, after 12 books, the Tin Man suddenly decides, maybe I should go back and marry that girl that I was going to marry before I got turned into a Tin Man. You know, it's been years, presumably, but suddenly I've decided I'm going to marry her. I don't even love her, but like I feel like it's my duty to marry her. So he goes to try and track her down. One thing that happened in this book that I really loved, it's a little bit dark, is that the Tin Woodman ends up finding his original meat head. They're still referring to humans as meat people, which I love. But yeah, he meets his head, and his other body parts are still around as well, and that was kind of weird, but I loved it. Then we had The Magic of Oz, and this one, everyone decides they need to get Ozma of Oz like a really special birthday present, and they all head off to get these different things, but end up in a bunch of trouble and having to save themselves. It was fine, but there was a lot going on, and as usual, it didn't seem to have much of a plot, really. But maybe it had more of a plot than some other ones. But anyway, then I read Glinda of Oz, the last book, and I will say, I think this was one of the better ones where we kind of have a bit of a plot as well. I feel like Frank Baum, so he died after writing this one. This is the last one that he completed, and then I think they took his notes and wrote a few more other things based on his notes, but this is the last one he wrote. I feel like he knew it was the last one. He's brought in pretty much all the characters from the previous books that people might have cared about. It does have a clear plot. Basically, Ozma and Dorothy go off to try and stop these two warring kingdoms out on the border of Oz. And then at the end, kind of everyone else comes to try and help. Admittedly, there is also a whole section about these three magic fishes and them tricking their way into being transformed back into magical sorceresses. So not entirely like properly Oz focused, but you get a lot of it. You don't really get that much of Glinda of Oz, but maybe more than you get in any of the other previous books. But I think overall it felt like a pretty satisfying conclusion to the books of Oz. I will say there's one part in it where Ozma is criticizing this other woman for being like, what gives you the right to assume supremacy over everyone else? And just the way she phrased it was like, but that's exactly what you're doing, Ozma. Because Ozma's coming in like, well, I'm the ruler of Oz, so you have to do what I say. Anyway, I do think Frank Baum has some really fun bits where he looks at like human flaws and I guess just the human condition, does it in quite a fun and clever way sometimes. Obviously these books are very old, so there are parts where it's like, not the best. And the writing style, like it isn't too bad, but it is a bit hard to get through at times. And sometimes I love Frank Baum's wordplay, but other times, just stop. It goes on a bit, and I wish he hadn't done it quite as much. Anyway, there is so much in this book series for a reteller to build on, but at the same time, a lot of what Frank Baum includes in these books is only included in one small part of one book and doesn't necessarily feel like a bigger, cohesive world. So, it's been a long time since I read the Wicked series. It'll be interesting to see which things have been included because there is so much potential. And I think actually having read this series, my favourite characters are no longer my favourite characters. Like I would have said Ozma and TikTok were my favourite characters. Now I would say Polychrome, Scraps the Patchwork Girl. Yeah, I think those two are my favourite characters now. Anyway, it is still 2 more weeks until we go and see the Wicked show, so I've got time to read Wicked. Oh, I have moved all my books into a new room and I don't know where that book has ended up, but I will find it and I will read it. So I'll catch up with you again when I pick that up. I probably won't be doing it in the next week because I want to read it just before I go to the musical, but for you in a moment we'll be reading Wicked and I'll let you know what I think about it, and then we can go to the show, which will be super exciting. Hello, so it's been a while since I updated this vlog, but it is now I think like half a week until we go and see the Wicked musical, so I have started reading Wicked. And firstly, I noticed that my edition actually says it's like an advanced review copy, but it seems like this was released initially in the US and then didn't get released in the UK until nearly 10 years later. And like here in New Zealand, most of the books we get are from the UK. And so I think I remember it being quite a new release when I first saw this when I was in university. But that must have been like the early 2000s, so I guess that was when it had just come out in the UK, even though it had been out for years in the US. That's so weird. Anyway, I've started reading this and I really am enjoying it. It is reminding me of how interesting I found this retelling when I read it back many, many years ago. It's just taking like this whimsical notion of Oz and making it into like a much more tangible, real world. I had forgotten there's quite a lot of like sexual deviance in it, and like there's this pleasure faith that's starting to gain influence, and there's this mechanical time dragon that's able to like do these puppet shows of people's like, I don't know, sinful behavior, but mostly seems to be related to sex. So there's some weird sex stuff in there, and it's not my favorite, but I think it's kind of got a point. Anyway, I don't care about that part of the story, really. I just like Elphaba. The other sexual stuff is more about her parents. Her father is a minister, so he's kind of going up against this pleasure faith, while also having this daughter that he's quite embarrassed about because, weirdly, she has green skin and pointy teeth and just doesn't seem quite normal. But I really like Elphaba, and I am excited because so the first part is really about her parents and her childhood. But I just started the second part, part 2, Gillikin, it is called. And the second part actually starts following Galinda, as she is one of the first woman students at this university. And I haven't gotten any further than that, but I remember that Elphaba and Galinda are going to have some kind of like school friendship, but also then some kind of conflict. And I'm just so excited because I remember loving it so much. I will say, so I read all the Oz books before I went into this, and so far, like, there are hints of the original Oz stuff in here, but also, the more I think about the Oz books, the more I'm like, there's not actually that much Oz world building that can be used, because, as I said, Frank Baum mostly focused on the characters, like creating really strange characters, and then also a lot of the Oz books are not even set in Oz, they're set in countries around Oz, so yeah, it'll be interesting. There is talk here about Ozma and doubts that Ozma is one single person, that she's like actually just new Ozmas all the time. And there is like this other religion, TikTokism. So there's mentions of things from the original Oz books, but also like there's so much already, even in this first part, that's been built completely from scratch or just from like base Oz ideas. Anyway, I'm going to update you probably after each part. I think there's 5 parts. Yes, so I'll update you after I've read part 2. I am running short of time, so hopefully it won't be too long from now. But it'll be 1 second for you. Hello. So I've actually read the next 2 sections of Wicked just because I was listening to the audiobook while I cleaned my deck, and I was so engaged in the book that I actually managed to get quite a lot of my deck cleaned, even though it took me forever, and I still haven't finished, but I'm really enjoying this. So the second part is mainly followed on Elphaba's schooling. We get one bit which is from Galinda's perspective. She does eventually change her name to Glinda, even though right at the beginning she's mad at someone for calling her Glinda, but she goes through some traumatic events. And I really like seeing Glinda's character development in this one. And then we also get a bit told from this boy named Bok's perspective. So it's really interesting that most of the story is not told from Elphaba's perspective. It's all third person, but still in the first section it's mainly Glinda's perspective, and then the second section is Bok, and it's more what they think about Elphaba and like their adventures with Elphaba being a part of it. And even the first section was really like about her parents more than it was about her. She was just there and like a problem for them to deal with. And then the third section is where Elphaba is really getting involved in this activist group. So there is a big theme in here where the animals, with a capital A, which is the animals that can talk, the wizard has come along and he has started basically taking away all their rights and just saying you can't really tell the difference between an animal and an animal with a capital A. So like, why should they be getting the same rights as people? And Elphaba really doesn't agree with that. A lot of people don't really seem to agree with that. So Elphaba's involved in this activist group, and most of that section is told from this guy's perspective that she met in school. He's like a a Vinkus prince, but it's interesting because in the Wizard of Oz books, they just referred to as the Winkies, whereas in this world, Winkies is more like a derogatory term, and it's really the Vinkus and the Vinkus people. I really love the world building in this. It's like he's taken all the little pieces that Frank Baum has dropped in there and like turned them into something so much more real. And there was one point where I thought actually maybe he's using the movie more than he's using the books, but he does have the silver slippers, not the ruby slippers, so that's the books. And I love how the silver slippers as well are being given more meaning. Honestly, so many things I love about this. And I think as long as you've read like the first 3-ish books, you'll get most of it, or all the important stuff anyway. I'm trying to remember when the gnome became a thing in the main Oz books. Maybe it was that 3rd book. Anyway, I'm trying to remember this guy's name. I can never remember it. Fiyero. So Fiyero is this Vinkus prince, and he's kind of met up with Elphaba again after they've both finished school, and she's doing this activist work. And then, right at the end of that, things kind of go badly, and now Elphaba is heading out. We don't know where she's heading yet because I've only just started that section, but she's kind of having to live with the consequences of her actions. And even that part where now Elphaba's kind of alone is being told from the perspective of like other peripheral characters. And I'm beginning to wonder, are we ever going to get Elphaba's perspective? I don't really remember. As well, still no mention of like any of the characters from The Wizard of Oz, like Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion. And I don't remember where they come in. And I feel like I'm a long way through. 2/3 maybe. Maybe that's optimistic. Anyway, I'm going to try and read some more of this physically today, as well as I still have a little bit of deck to go. I also have a lot of cleaning to do, so I'll try and do a bunch of that stuff today. And then maybe I can finish this and be ready for the Wicked show, which is in a couple of days. I know that a lot of things from this book won't be in the Wicked musical because it's just not family friendly. Like there's also this whole part in here about the pleasure faith that's kind of like there's a whole bunch of like religious conflict going on that really links into the whole thing where there were the Ozmas who were in charge, but now it's the wizard and all these religious changes. But the pleasure faith is one of the religions that's causing problems, and some of these school kids go to the philosophy club where some very sexually explicit things happen. And some of them are quite traumatized as a result of it. So yeah, not family friendly. And maybe not my favorite parts of the book, but I still feel like they do add to that world feeling surreal. Anyway, I need to finish this today because the day of the musical fast approaches. Hello, so it is the day of the Wicked musical. I'm leaving very soon to go and pick up my sister and head into town. Anyway, I finished reading Wicked. I really enjoyed it. I can see why when I was younger, like in my 20s, I continued on to read the rest of the series, and I think I will be continuing the series in the next few months because I do want to see like the continued development of the world. And I really just love how Gregory Maguire has like twisted the story of Dorothy. Like Dorothy's story is true, but everything around it is not anything that she was aware of. And so like it adds so much. I do think there are a few bits that don't really fit with the full Oz world building. Like even the big conflict in here about whether animals with a capital A, animals that can talk, should be considered equals to humans, and like having all their rights stripped away by the wizard. That whole part doesn't really make sense because like they keep talking about there actually being normal non-talking animals in Oz, but in the Oz books, like all animals talk. And even eventually, you know, we find out that Toto could talk if he wanted to. So that bit totally doesn't fit. There is a bit with some children. I really love the children, and one of the children is talking about having talked to a goldfish and how she was telling him about how she's actually a sorceress, but he gets cut off before he can say any more. I'm pretty sure that's the goldfish from the last book, right? The last book of the Oz books. Anyway, I really like this. I do think there's parts where it does drag on a little bit and the writing style is and there's like some of the sex stuff, like I can see the themes it's trying to go for, but those bits weren't my favorite. So like, it's not a perfect book, but I really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to the musical, even though I really can't see how it could be the same as this, really, because so many of the themes aren't family friendly, but I guess we'll see when we go tonight, and then I can let you know my final thoughts on this whole Oz journey that I've been on over the last month.
If you set yourself on fire, I never let you burn. I would smoke you till my lungs hurt.
Hello, so it is now the next day. I did not update you after the show because by the time we got home it was late and I was tired. As well, I don't think I got much footage while we were there just because there were so many people. I don't think I've been to anything with so many people since COVID times, and as an introvert I would really prefer less people, but it was fine. And then of course, like in the show, they don't really want you filming anyway. They did threaten to set the flying monkeys on anyone who was filming, so I didn't want that because actually the monkeys were the creepiest part of the show, I think. But I did really like the show. I know in the beginning I was a little bit put off, I guess, by the differences from the book, which was to be expected. But like, I didn't like Elphaba's personality. She just seemed like she wanted to be liked by everyone, whereas the Elphaba in the book seemed more like she didn't care so much. And I don't know, her personality was a little bit darker and serious, somber. I really liked the book Elphaba better. And then as well, like Nessarose, why does she have arms? Why? I can understand it, but like, I preferred it when she didn't have arms. And there were no TikToks. I love TikToks. So I was sad that there were no TikToks. But again, I think that's just like a ease of putting together a show type thing. Like the TikToks would be hard to do. I did think that maybe the New Zealand show was a little bit lower budget. I think it was. But I looked at some of the original kind of ones online and I don't think it was too bad. As well, what I noticed is in the original show, the actors were really old. That's so weird because the main part of the story is like these university students. So why would the actors be so old? So like, I actually liked that the New Zealand show had younger actors and it felt much more genuine because of that, I think. Although, like, it was still older people for, like, Madame Marable and the Wizard of Oz and, like, all the teacher-type people. Actually, I'm not sure about Dr. Dillamond, who's a goat, because he was wearing a goat mask. But we did see his face at the very end. I think he might have been younger. I'm not sure. Anyway, I thought the Auckland cast did a really good job, especially the Glinda girl. I think we actually got the alternate one, but she was really great. And I think Glinda is the strongest part of the show. Like, they really exaggerated Glinda from the book and made it a little bit ridiculous, but that does kind of give the show the humor. There is also this love triangle in the show, which is not in the books, and I'm not a fan of love triangles. However, again, while I didn't like it in the beginning, I think the way it was done did mean the end of the show was more emotional, and like, there was like this whole theme of friendship and betrayal and how does that work out. And that was sort of in the book, but not to the same degree. So I feel like the book was really good in the beginning and just like did so much amazing world building. But the ending, the book let things down a little bit, whereas the show kind of builds and builds. And as well, the show did do a better job of like linking in the original story with Dorothy and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion. It made those connections clearer. So I was actually worried that I wouldn't like the show after I read the book and read some reviews. But I actually did like the show, but in a completely different way than I liked the book. I will say there was no animal with a capital A, animal murders in the show. And it really doesn't, like at the end it focuses much more on the conflict between Elphaba and the wizard and this love triangle thing, and it kind of forgets entirely about the whole story about the animals being oppressed. Whereas the book, I think, doesn't really forget about that theme. It's like the core theme of the book, sort of. Anyway, lots of differences, but I loved it. I also really like to think about how the book and the musical have built on Frank Baum's stories, even though Frank Baum's stories are so different. Like, they don't really go for any attempt at realism. The characters don't feel real, even though Frank Baum's strength is his characters. It's the ideas of his characters rather than them feeling like real people. But I feel like that's something that maybe has changed over time. Like when Wizard of Oz books were originally written, people weren't so focused on making things seem realistic because fiction was supposed to be fiction. Maybe that's not true, but probably for fantasy, like children fantasy books like what Frank Baum was writing, there was no attempt at reality. Whereas I would say even children fantasy books now have more of an attempt at realism than like the Wizard of Oz books. I don't know, I'm talking like I'm an expert, but let's be honest, I haven't read a lot of books back from when the Oz books came out. I don't even know what the date was, but I know I haven't read many classics because I don't usually like them. And I think part of it is that they don't feel as real. Oh no, I feel like I'm falling into a big hole of like, what is real and how has our perception of reality changed over time? Anyway, I've had an exciting journey through all the Oz books. I think you can definitely appreciate the Gregory Maguire Oz books and the musical without reading Frank Baum's original ones. I would also say if you really do want to read Frank Baum's original ones, you could probably get by with just the first 3. And after that, it does go on a bit. And a lot of the stories aren't really about Oz. So like maybe only read them if you're really enjoying them. I will also say I realized I didn't watch any of the movies. I'm just not good at watching movies and I've run out of time. And I don't know if I'm in the mood for more Oz stuff now. Maybe once I've had a break. I do think I'll be finishing this series, maybe in the coming months for the Wicked books. So there are 3 more books in that series. And I know when I was 20-ish and I read these books originally, I really loved the rest of the series. I thought it was a longer series than a quartet, but apparently it's just a quartet. It probably just took 20-year-old me a long time to read because she didn't read as much as I do, even though she probably still read quite a lot. But anyway, I would love to talk with you about anything Oz related down in the comments. Let me know if you've read any of the Wicked books, if you've gone to see the show, if you've read many of the original Oz books. Also, if you've watched any of the movies lately, you can tell me your thoughts about those because it's been a while for me. I still definitely think Return to Oz is my favourite. I don't think that will ever change. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well. Let's chat in the comments and I will see you next time.